beautiful! I am so happy that you're watching this video. This channel is all about creating art, being inspired, and building a happy creative life. I am Sandra and I'm a watercolor artist, nature lover, coffee addict, a mother, a crazy cat lady, and a loving partner. I like to share with you the way that I see the world and how it inspires me to create my art. Mostly in watercolors, but also in other mediums from time to time. I believe that anybody can learn how to paint or grow their creative business, or find peace and mindfulness by creating something they truly love. And I like to help you start your own creative journey. I can't wait to get started. Let's go! Hello, my creative friends! This video I am going to share with you some basic and fun watercolor techniques for beginners. So if you're just starting out and looking to become more confident when painting with watercolors, and just get to the point that you can really have fun with it, well, this is the place to begin. Well, I can't wait to get started. Let's go! In this video, we are going to work with this content. At first we start with the supplies which you need to be able to follow along. And then we are going to cover watercolor washes, wet on wet and wet on dry techniques, watercolor blooms, and we finish off with some fun textures with salt and alcohol. Let's start with supplies. This is a list of the materials that I used to create this tutorial and which you need if you want to follow along. You can pause the video here to write everything down, or you can download the PDF of the tutorial, which is going to be attached in a link to this video. Of course, I'm going to walk you through it right now. Watercolor paint. You can use cheap kind of watercolor paint or more expensive. It doesn't really matter, it depends on what you have. So to show you the difference between the cheaper watercolor and the more professional watercolor, I am going to demonstrate it for you. So just showing you different types of paint here, and I'm going to start painting with a watercolor paint for children. I'm just painting simple shapes, and I'm going to paint some shapes with more water and some with more paint pigment. Well, as you can see, this is the paint usually used for children, and well, I think it just looks, it looks good. So now I'm going to paint with the other type of paint, also used by children, which I think is a little bit better quality. And I think the difference you see is more in the kind of colors of the paint. I must admit that I like this color. So, well, this is the paint that I use, Winsor Newton. I bought this box years ago, and well, there are a lot of paints in it, different colors, and I guess it took me a couple of years before the first paints got empty. And right now I buy tubes, and then I fill them. You see some empty spots there, but I fill those paints now with the tubes. As you can see, I've got a big collection. This is what I gathered over the years, and some tubes I buy several of them, and other tubes I do a year or longer. It just depends on the color, if I use it often or not. And then at the moment I use Winsor Newton Professional, but I started with Cotman. Cotman is the cheaper version. It's actually the paints I started with is also Cotman from Winsor Newton. So now I'm going to paint with my own paint, and I'm trying to pick a color that matches the color I painted with the other ones. I don't really like this one, it's a bit darker. The other ones are more green or light blue. So let me see if I'm going to paint with some less pigment. Okay, I'm going to try out another color to see if it matches more. No, this is a green. Okay, yes, this one is coming close, but as you can see, the quality of the paint doesn't really matter because all the colors you're painting with all the colors that I painted with in this example are just looking really pretty. So it really depends on kind of colors, I guess. But if you see difference, it mostly is because is that the cheaper paints have less pigment, are less vibrant than the more expensive colors. That's mostly the difference. Also, when you look at the more professional paint, there are different price ranges because there are extra pigmented paints and you pay more for that. So I guess it's great if you just try out the paint that you have and see where you go and experiment with the colors and the paints that you have. And just have fun. For this tutorial I used a round brush size 14. It's recommended to use a bigger brush, it can also be a mop brush or a flat. Let's talk about watercolor paper. So I dug up my collection and as you see I've got a lot, all kinds of stuff in notebooks, journals and on pads. I also like just the sheets you can buy on a roll. Well, for the most important thing to look at when you buy watercolor paper is the weight, because with watercolor paint you paint with a lot of water, so the paper needs to be heavy enough. You can also look at the structure of the paper, if it's cold pressed or hot pressed, and the grain. This is a fine grain, so you can paint on it with a lot of details. Oh, well, I like to paint with rough grain, and in these tutorials you see that the paper is really rough. I like the effects it brings, but if you would like to paint with a lot of details, small details, then it's better to have grain, a finer grain. There's also black watercolor paper. We're not going to use that this class, but I'd like to show you. It is really fun to play with metallic iridescent paint. It's a really cool effect. So this paper is cold pressed with a rough grain. It's 300 grams, so that's really the good paper. You see that structure is really rough. Also this one. You see, that's what I want to show you, that every type of paper is different. So it's really fun to browse around what's good for you. So here's the cheaper paper, but it's important. It's 300 grams. And this is a fine grain. This is really nice to start with and you don't have to pay a lot of money. The Arches paper is more expensive. This one is not heavy enough, but this one is my personal favorite paper. It's 300 grams and as I said, it's the rough. You can also choose the fine grain. This is more expensive, but what I like about this one is that it's glued around so that the paper won't go all wobbly on me. I don't have to fixate it on something. It's already done for me, so I can paint. And then when it's finished with a knife, I can cut it off. So this is really my favorite paper. Even though good quality is important and can have an effect on your output, it's not necessary to start out buying very expensive paper when you're just starting painting with watercolor. You know, the cheaper paper will do. The most important thing, as I said, is that you look for the weight, that it needs to be 300 grams, and just try it out. And then later on you can, it's really, either way, it's really a great idea to try out painting on different kinds of paper, and then you'll discover your favorite kind. It's a journey, it's an experiment, just having fun. Alright, you also need some paper towels. You can also use old rags to clean off your brush and to fix mistakes on the paper while you're painting. And you need 2 cups or jars with clean water to paint with. Now, about those 2 jars of water, there's a reason that I use 2 and that I recommend you do the same. You need 1 jar with clean water for cleaning your brush, and then you need the other one to pick up clean water to paint with. Because if you have just 1 jar with water and you just cleaned your brush with, say, blue paint, then the water is blue. Then you want to paint with, say, red paint, and you've got all this dirty water on your brush, and then it makes the color a bit muddy. So that's not really what you want when you're painting. So you've got 1 brush to clean it and one jar to clean it and 1 jar to paint with. So here I am again talking about the water jars. As you notice, I've got a piece of tape covering my jar. So I was wondering if you were wondering if there's a reason for this. Well, the answer to that question, in case you were wondering, is yes, there is a special reason. The reason is I'm also a tea drinker, and well, this time I'm using a jar, but I can also use cups for my water. And well, it occasionally happens that you sometimes clean your brush in your teacup, so then you're going to drink paint tea water. And to prevent that, I am putting tape to cover my jars or my cups or whatever I'm using for paint water, so that I know it's paint. And this is something that I really have in my system now. This is paint, and this is where I need to put my brush in. So like some kind of safety measure. So, tip for you. And last but not least, you're going to need some salt, preferable with a larger grain. And some rubbing alcohol. And now we really can get started. Let's go! A watercolor wash is a layer of color that is somewhat transparent applied with diluted paint. As it usually covers larger areas, it is an important basis of watercolor painting. You can create a watercolor wash on a dry surface and on a wet surface with different results. We are going to start out on a dry surface. As you see, I'm using some washi tape or masking tape to define the shapes that I'm going to be painting. This way you'll know that you've got some clean, crisp edges. So grab your brush and make it wet with some clean water, and pick a color which you want to paint with. It doesn't matter what color. I'm choosing a red pinkish color, making it really wet, making sure that I've got a really wet brush with a lot of pigment on my brush. And then we're starting to paint strokes. We will start in the left upper corner, and then we're going to paint strokes from left to right. For this first exercise, I decided to paint with what I have on my brush. So I'm not getting new paint on my brush. In the second exercise, I am doing that. Also, you see that I didn't put extra water on my brush, so you see that it's a lot more pigmented. The first square is really light, it's a really light wash, and the second one is a darker wash. Well, this is a really great example of watercolor washes. It's really very easy. This is the first step and the basic of every painting you're going to make. Getting ready with my washi tape again to create 2 more shapes. Yes, let's get started again. We're going to do the same thing. Clean your brush, put water on it, pick a color. I chose a different color this time. And we're going to paint strokes from left to right. And this time I'm going to put some more paint on my brush every stroke, because I like to have it really colorful and vibrant. But as you see, we're starting left, so left is where the color is more vibrant, more darker. But you also can see it flow through the paint more in the direction to the left. You can also try to experiment with the pressure you put on the brush, so you can make smaller strokes or bigger strokes. Alright, now it's time to go create some wet washes. Again, starting off with creating some shapes with washi tape. Now for this step, it is important to use clean water. You first paint in your shape with clean water, so you don't see anything, you're just wetting the paper. Look at how wet the paper is. Now we are going to do the same. We wet our brush, put some paint on it, and we're going to paint brush strokes from left to right. And now you can see how the paint is moving towards the water that's already on the paper. I'm going to paint some few more strokes, but as you can see, because the paper is already wet, it's blending really smoothly. And this time you don't really see the difference between the dry wash and the wet wash, but it's really nice to know and very important to know the difference in both kind of techniques when later on you're going to paint something else, like a scenery or a landscape. Then there are moments that you don't want to have the paint flow into another part of the paper, so you don't want to wet it first, but at other times you want to paint bigger surfaces at once, and then it might be easier to wet it at first. And this is the result when the paint is dry. And now one of my favorite things, pulling off the washi tape off the paper. It's oddly satisfying. See those nice sharp lines? That's why I use the tape. Once you get the hang of creating watercolor washes, you can start building on that by adding more paint. With the wet on wet technique, you'll add paint on a still wet layer. This way, the paint will blend into the already existing layer. You can do this with the same color, as we have been doing already with the watercolor washes, or you can do it with different colors for different effects. We are starting off again by drawing a shape or marking the shape with masking tape or washi tape. You can start by painting a first layer. You can do it with clean water or with paint. At this point that doesn't matter because we're going to add layers on top of it anyway. So I chose to pick a color, going for red, and I'm painting my first basic layers. And now you can start adding on top of this layer. You don't really have to start in the upper left corner for this part. Just play around a little, paint stripes, paint dots. Just look at how the paint is flowing through the already wet layer. It's like moving, it's flowing. Try to paint lines, try to make them really thin, crisp lines, but you see, especially when it's drying, that it's going to blend, it's going to waver out. For the fun of it, I'm also painting some loose shapes. You know, just to see, you paint one layer and then you pick up some more paint and you paint on top of it. I encourage you to try out the same, and you don't need to stop with 2 shapes. You can paint as many as you like just to get a feeling and get a hang of it. I'd like to show you now the effect of painting wet on wet with different kind of colors. Therefore, I thought it would be fun to try and paint some gradients. For that, we're starting the same way again by drawing shapes or marking the shape with some washi tape. So again, clean your brush, make it wet, and this time I'm going to paint in the shape with some clean water. So for the gradients, you want to have the paint nicely flow into each other. So then I like to work on a wet surface. So yeah, I really love how this is looking, how this flows. Okay, so for this first gradient, I'm going to choose some colors in the same kind of range, but still you should be able to see the difference. And this way, how it flows really nice into each other. Pick another color. Oh, you really have to play around with this. You can't do this often to see how you can create the effect that you really want. So at this moment, it's not really that I've got some straight lines, but I'm having fun. I really love to see how that paint is flowing. At this time, I'm also starting from left to right, and perhaps you like to do it from left to right and then from right to left. There really are no rules. It's just that, you know, you're like having fun and experimenting and then trying out and see the effects. Okay, so I'm choosing a little bit of a darker color for the bottom, the same color that I started in the top. Speeding this part up a little. Now, as you can see, I got a little overboard with the amount of water, and well, the paper is really wet. If you think it's really too much, you can use a paper towel and try to gently remove some of the excess water. La 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 la. Alright, let's go to the second shape. Well, for this layer I didn't wet the paper first, so we're painting on the dry paper. So this first line that I've drawn is wet on dry technique, but we're going to paint more layers while this first line is still wet. Now you can see how it is nicely, smoothly blending into the first layer. But because the paper wasn't already wet, you get more straight lines. Okay, well, more-ish. Okay, now I'm going to pick more colors for this one. I also would like to add some green and blue in here. Okay, that was not enough pigment that I had in mind. I really love painting these gradients. Okay, a darker green. And now let's see if we can add some blue. Really nice rainbow gradient that we're painting here. Now, As I said, when we started out, you saw that the lines were really straight because the paper underneath was dry. But now, because we're painting with wet layers on top of each other or next to each other, you see how it's blending into each other, and the top two lines that were crisp before are not anymore. Alright, we're going to do some color blending. Now you can blend your colors on your palette, but you can also do it on your paper, especially when you're using the wet on wet technique. So for this exercise, it's easiest to just pick a few colors that you like to blend, and then first paint a shape, just a little loose with the first color, then paint a little a shape with the second color, and then you're going to paint a third shape where you're going to blend both colors on top of each other. Now I started out a little bit off, so I first painted the two shapes with the first color, and now I'm adding the second color on top of one of the shapes and try to blend it and see what color it becomes. Now I was expecting a beautiful green because I was mixing yellow and blue, but well, that's why it's important to try and experiment with blending these kind of colors and paints together, because on paper it can turn out all kinds of way, and it's really nice to just experiment with it and see what happens. So now I'm liking this green. It's more of a moss green, okay, so on the second layer I also want to start blending these two. I want to blend the blue with another color, and it is at this point that I realized that I mixed up the order I am doing this in. So adding the blue from the first layer, so you see it's on one layer, the yellow, the blue, I mixed together and it became green. So now for the second layer I already painted two blue shapes and I want to mix it with red. Now also other primary colors, when you mix blue and red, what do you get? I was hoping for purple, and I'm getting some kind of muddy, I don't know what this is doing, but it's not doing it for me. I think this is not, well, no, this isn't it for me. So, third layer, we're getting a hang of it. So I start off with the first shape with color red. It's the first color that I want to blend, and now I'm picking the color yellow to blend it with. So I'm going to paint my second shape in yellow. I'm going through the primary color, so this one needs to be done as well. So now I'm going to blend it. So first the yellow, and now I'm going to add the red, and I am expecting it to turn into beautiful orange. So yes, I think this one works alright from the beginning. Now let's try a few more blending options. And now I'm going to go for totally different colors, starting with a light blue, actually light turquoise blue, and some violet, because these are two of my favorite colors and I'm curious to see what they do when we're going to blend them. What I'm loving this is looking some kind of lavender color. Alright, last layer, starting with a darker blue, putting a lot of pigment in there. Alright, I'm going for some kind of pink color, darker pink. Now, this should become a beautiful purple. I really think it should. I think we will have a better result than with the blue and the red. Yes, definitely. Almost looks like the violet on the right. So, well, this is color blending. I suggest that you try this as many times as you like, with as many colors as you like, to get a real good feeling. So with the wet on wet technique, you kind of blend in the new paint on the paper or the already existing layer of paint that is still wet. But when you're using the wet on dry technique, it means that the paper is still dry, or that you have already painted a layer, but that the layer is completely dry. So you're actually adding a new layer. And this wet on dry painting technique gives you more control over your brush strokes and the shapes that you're painting. So if you load your brush with wet paint and paint it on a dry paper, you get a shape that has hard edges but has flowing liquid paint in the middle. And when you work wet on dry, the watercolor doesn't flow around, it doesn't bleed as we saw happening with the wet on wet technique. It only expands from the form that you're painting in if you deliberately push it out or move it around with your brush. So I thought of a fun exercise to demonstrate the effect of painting wet paint on already dry layers. So if you want to follow along, I started with painting watercolor circles, and I am going to paint 4 columns. The first column is going to have only 1 layer of paint, and the second column 2 layers, the third column 3 layers, and the fourth column 4 layers. So I'm going to paint all the first layer at this moment, and I've decided to go for several colors. And then when we have painted this layer, we're going to let it dry. You can let nature dry it, or if you want to move the process along, you can use something like a hair blower to dry it up a bit faster. Yay! It is dry, so now we're going to paint the second layer. The first column, we only are going to do 1 layer, so we're not going to paint anything on there. And all the other dots we are going to paint a second layer on top of it. I've decided that the second layer on all the circles is going to be the same yellow. And because the first layer on every row has different colors, you are going to see the effect it has when you're painting with a color on a dry layer of paint with another color. So I have painted the second and third layer, which have already dried. Now I'm going to paint the fourth layer in the fourth column only. I thought this would be fun to see the effect it has on the layers below. And as you can see, the results are quite different between the circles we've painted. Yes, and now it's time to let it dry. So what I want to point out now that the circles have completely dried is that when you paint with a dry on wet technique, that you've got sharp edges, as I stated before. You've got the sharp edges on the outside of your shape, but then the inside of the shape you can still see the watercolory, flowy effect of the watercolor paint. Watercolor blooms are irregular patterns and hard edges that appear within painted area in a watercolor painting. This pattern can kind of look like a cauliflower. Probably you already have painted this before, but didn't realize that you painted a watercolor bloom. In some paint disciplines, the creation of watercolor blooms are unwanted and are therefore avoided. But personally, I love the watercolor blooms and the modern, playful effect that it creates. The blooms are caused by uneven drying times when one part of a painting area dries before other parts of the area. This can happen when you paint a large area too slow, re-wet an area that's dry, have much more water on your brush than the area you're painting, or when water puddles in part of the painting arise. Now we are going to do a fun exercise to try and create the watercolor blooms, not by accident, but deliberate. What we're going to do is paint some watercolor washes, and this time I didn't mark the shape I'm painting with washi tape. You can do that if you'd like. I didn't do that for this exercise. But what I did, after I painted the watercolor wash and the paint was still wet, perhaps a little bit dried, I am putting some water on my brush and having water drops fall into the layer of paint. Now I'm going to paint another shape and I'm going to try to do it again. And I suggest that you also try this and play around. Especially it's really fun if you have a really light layer of some paint or water and then you put some paint on your brush and drop it inside on top of the wet layer. So I'm going to speed it up and show you how I'm painting more shapes and dropping more paint and water into the already painted layers. And I put some more water on some places than on other parts. And I suggest that you try out all these things that I'm doing and just play around, and then the important thing is wait and see what happens when it dries. Because it really becomes a watercolor bloom when it dries up. And when the paint's still wet, you can see the first effect, but you really see the full effect when the paint has dried. So my paintings have fully dried, and I'm going to try and mark the shapes that have become watercolor blooms. And as you can see, there are some harsh lines that kind of look like a cauliflower. Now this is a really fun exercise. For this one I did mark the shapes that I'm going to paint with some washi tape. And well, we just are going to start with painting a watercolor wash. Just pick a color, and for the fun of it I am going to add some other colors in it as well. Just very playful. And then the fun part is that we're going to put some salt on top of the still wet paint. It is important that you do this when the paint is still wet. And then when the paint dries, you know, the salt is going to absorb some of the water, and it leaves a really fun texture on the paint layer. And of course you can do this as often as you like. And now we have finished this part. Now we have to wait until the paint has dried. When the paint is dry, you can rub off the salt and you can see the cool effect it has made on the watercolor. And this is also the part, the really fun part, that you can remove the washi tape. And now we're going to do the same thing, but then instead of salt, we're going to use alcohol to see what kind of effect it has on the watercolor and what cool texture it's going to create. So I've already marked my shapes with some washi tape, and now let's start painting in the shapes with some pretty colors. Time to grab our alcohol. I chose a smaller brush for this, but you can also use something like a toothpick or something. And you just drop the alcohol into the watercolor. And you see that especially the watercolor places that are still really wet, you see the effect of the drop alcohol. So it looks really cool. Just play around with it and have some fun. And when we're ready, it's time to let it dry. And then now the fun part of removing the washi tape and enjoying the result. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you liked it and that it helped you getting more confident with painting with watercolors. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and please don't forget to follow me if you would like to see more content in the future. We worked on the watercolor basics right now, and that means that we can build on this in the future. So really cool watercolor paint projects are coming along, and I'm working on them right now, and I know they're going to be really fun. So I hope to see you soon. Bye! Oh, and before I forget, I also wouldn't mind if you leave a comment and let me know what you think about this watercolor tutorial. Because this is the first one that I've created and I can use all the feedback in the world to make the next one even better. So please let me know what you think. Okay, bye! And of course, if you have followed along this tutorial, I would really love to see the results of your exercises and experiments. So if you would like to share them with me, you can share them directly to me or post them on social media by using the hashtag #CreateWithSandras. And please tag me as Sandra Art Studio. I also would love to give you feedback if you'd like.